Look, it takes a lot to leave me speechless. I analyze legal cases and cultural phenomena for a living. I see the dark side of humanity every single day. But today, we need to talk about something that makes my blood absolutely boil. It is incredibly difficult to stay calm, to remain neutral, and to bite my tongue when I have to sit here and watch a 17-year-old's life get snuffed out in a completely senseless, cold-blooded act of violence, only to then watch a deranged mob turn that tragedy into a sick, twisted media circus. I'm talking about the case of Carmelo Anthony and the murder of Austin Metcalf in April 2025 down in Frisco, Texas. Folks, this is not just another high school legal tragedy. This is a slap in the face to human decency. It is an insult to the very concept of justice. And more than anything, it is the most glaring proof we have of how a frenzied, culturally decayed mob can become utterly ruthless and hypocritical. A brilliant teenager lost his life over a spot to stand under a track tent in the rain. Let that sink in, a spot under a tent. But what should outrage every single person with a functioning moral compass isn't just the fatal stab wound. It's the coordinated campaign of lies, the blind defense of a killer, and the open, vile racial hatred being spewed right outside the courtroom doors. We need to break this down. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly how broken this system and our culture has become. To truly understand the brutality of what happened, we have to go back to the catalyst, the 2nd of April, 2025. Frisco, Texas. A massive track and field meet is taking place, bringing together kids from multiple local high schools. Suddenly, a heavy rainstorm rolls in. Athletes are scrambling, trying to find any shelter they can. Now, listen to the setup here. Both Austin Metcalf and Carmelo Anthony are seniors. Both are star high school football players with incredibly bright futures, literally on the verge of being scouted for college scholarships. In a normal world, these two would have met on a college gridiron, shaking hands after a hard-fought game. Instead, Carmelo Anthony, a student from Centennial High, steps into a track tent that belonged to the Memorial High School track team. That's where Austin Metcalf, his twin brother Hunter, and their teammates were standing. It was just a tent, it was just a little rain, but pure, unadulterated arrogance and a sickening habit of carrying a deadly weapon turned that mundane moment into a murder scene. I want to ask you a question as an expert who looks at criminal intent. Why does a 17-year-old kid bring a sharp folding knife onto a high school campus at a public sporting event? This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a pocket knife he forgot to leave on his dresser. Bringing a strictly prohibited, lethal weapon into an educational environment reveals the mindset of someone who is fundamentally prepared to use violence to solve the most trivial conflicts. When you consciously hide a folding knife in your backpack and walk into a track meet, you immediately forfeit the right to play the innocent victim when things go south. Now, the real outrage, the thing that will make you want to scream at your screen, starts when we look at how the media and the public twisted the truth for an entire year before this trial even began. For 12 months, Carmelo Anthony's supporters unapologetically peddled a narrative that was a flat-out, shameless lie. They paraded around social media claiming Anthony was a poor victim, that he was jumped by a racist white mob of teenagers, and that he only pulled the knife in a desperate, last-ditch effort to survive. They painted him as a martyr, an underdog pushed to the brink by schoolyard bullies. But guys, lies cannot survive under the harsh light of a courtroom projector. When the prosecutors finally played the security surveillance video from the stadium in open court, the brutal truth shattered that entire fabricated narrative into a million pieces. First of all, there was no mob. The wide-angle surveillance video proves, unequivocally, that Anthony was never surrounded, never beaten down, and never had his life threatened by a group of white teens. Second, the timeline. The tape shows Anthony and Austin Metcalf standing together under that same tent for roughly 4 whole minutes. 4 minutes! There was no riot. There was no sudden ambush. And third, and as a legal analyst, this is the nail in the coffin look at the behavior immediately after the killing. In law, we call this consciousness of guilt. Does Anthony collapse in fear? Does he stand there and call 911 like a victim who just had to defend his life? No. He acts like a cold-blooded killer. He dumps the murder weapon, sprints away from the crime scene, and tries to blend into the fleeing crowd to escape. The smug confidence of the people who spread these rumors for a year now looks pathetic. They weaponized a malicious lie to whitewash a murderer, all while dragging the name of a dead teenager through the mud. A teenager who isn't here to defend himself. Let's move into the courtroom in Collin County, where Anthony's defense team is actually trying to cling to the argument of justifiable self-defense. As an analyst, I have to tell you, this isn't just an insult to Texas state law. It is an insult to basic human intelligence. Texas attorney Bridget Williams broke this down perfectly. The core principle of self-defense on the books is equal force. If someone shoves you, you have the legal right to use your hands to shove them back. You do not get to pull a gun or plunge a knife into their chest over a push. Let's look at the hard evidence presented. Austin Metcalf was completely unarmed. He used his hands to push or grab Anthony's backpack to ask someone who wasn't on his team to leave his team's tent. That is standard physical friction between 7-year-old boys. But what did Anthony do? Witnesses standing right there under the tent testified that when asked to leave, Anthony got aggressive. He started talking reckless. He didn't take a step back. He didn't try to de-escalate. Instead, he reached into his bag, touched the weapon, and literally said, "Make me move," or "Touch me again and see what happens." Do you hear that? Touch me and see what happens. This is the very definition of premeditated malice. Throwing out a threat while simultaneously prepping a lethal weapon proves Anthony was not caught off guard. He set a psychological trap. He provoked physical contact so he could use it as a twisted justification to pull the blade he had hidden. Stabbing an unarmed kid in the chest with a folding knife over a spot in the rain is not self-defense. It is unprovoked, cold-blooded murder. Period. While the mob outside is busy cheering for the aggressor, how many people have actually stopped to feel the gut-wrenching agony of the victim's family? Imagine the sheer torment of Mr. Jeff Metcalf, a father robbed of a brilliant son with a wide-open college future ahead of him. The image of this grieving father, standing silently in sunglasses before the media cameras, suppressing unimaginable pain before security had to ask him to leave. It is haunting. He lost his boy. And his grief is multiplied by 1,000 every time he sees the public trample on his son's grave to protect the killer. But the absolute cruelest tragedy belongs to Hunter Metcalf, Austin's twin brother. These two grew up together, shared the same dreams, sweat on the same fields, looked toward the same future. What kind of psychological trauma does it inflict to stand helplessly on a track field and watch your own flesh and blood collapse on the bleachers? Austin's final words were, "I've been stabbed." He faded out and took his last breath right there in his twin brother's arms. That is a life sentence of emotional trauma for the people left behind. They took a life and they permanently shattered a family. And yet, the guy who did it is paying lawyers to find a loophole. Now we get to the part that truly exposes the sickness in our society, because the real horror of this case exploded outside the courtroom. When Carmelo Anthony's bond was reduced from $1 million down to $250,000, allowing him to walk out on a GPS monitor, the societal fault lines cracked wide open. Instead of condemning a kid who brought a knife to school and killed someone, a loud segment of the public decided to turn the murderer into a hero to fit their own political and racial agendas. Let's talk about the money. While the Metcalf family was drowning in grief and trying to pay for a funeral, Groups masquerading as social justice warriors set up a give-send-go legal defense fund for Carmelo Anthony. And it didn't just get a few bucks. It skyrocketed to over $600,000, with some commentators reporting it reached nearly $1 million. Let me be very clear about what that is. That is a mob publicly crowdfunding a reward for the fatal stabbing of an innocent white teenager. And then, the protests. The videos outside the courthouse are despicable. Agitators carrying Black Lives Matter signs weren't there, calling for peace. They were hurling absolute garbage, using vile racial slurs against the victim and the police, calling people crackers, screaming, and we have this on video, screaming, "The only good cracker is a dead cracker." Listen to me carefully. This toxic culture of hatred excuses pure evil as long as the racial optics fit their narrative. It is peak hypocrisy. As astute commentators have pointed out, America doesn't have a universal homicide problem. The FBI statistics are brutally clear. The vast majority of violence inflicted upon Black Americans is committed by other Black Americans. If the crowd screaming outside that courthouse truly believed that Black lives mattered, they would be protesting the internal violence in their communities. They would be protesting the toxic street culture that tells young men it's cool to carry weapons to protect their fragile egos. Instead, they ignore the data. They rally to glorify a kid who took a life with a folding knife solely because the killer looks like them and the victim doesn't. That is not a civil rights movement. That is the definition of a broken culture. Right now, this first-degree murder trial is a literal powder keg. The pressure on the Collin County judicial system is immense. The presiding judge has received a barrage of online threats. Anthony's family claims they are being harassed. Even finding a jury was a nightmare. They had to filter 600 potential jurors down to 250 inches a matter of days because the media's toxic misinformation had already infected the jury pool. Inside that courtroom, it is lockdown mode. No electronics, no live streams, no biased clothing. Journalists are back to using pen and paper. The court is desperately trying to insulate the truth from the madness raging outside. In opening statements, the first assistant district attorney of Collin County stood up and delivered the absolute truth. Quote, "This case has nothing to do with race. This case is also not about self-defense. The facts of this case are very simple. This is a senseless murder." Bingo. We cannot let the noise of social media or the weight of $1 million defense fund blur that fundamental fact. When the cops cuffed Anthony, his own spontaneous confession was, "I am not the alleged suspect. I did it." The video is clear. The witnesses are ready. So, how does this end? The judge hasn't dropped the final gavel yet. The trial is ongoing. But as someone who analyzes the law, the legal puzzle is already solved. Based on an unbreakable chain of evidence, here is my firm prediction on how this plays out. The verdict, guilty. The jury is going to completely nuke the defense's laughable self-defense argument. The flight from the scene, the concealed, prohibited weapon, and those calculated words, "Touch me and see what happens," Anthony essentially dug his own legal grave. The most probable outcome is that this jury will convict Carmelo Anthony of first-degree murder exactly as charged. The sentence: I know a lot of angry people want an eye for an eye, but under Texas state law, the death penalty is off the table because Anthony was 17 at the time of the crime. That is the one and only legal lifeline he has. But escaping lethal injection doesn't mean escaping justice. For a first-degree murder conviction with this level of malicious intent, Carmelo Anthony is looking at spending the vast majority, if not the entirety, of his natural life rotting inside a Texas state penitentiary. There will be no stadium lights, no football scholarships, just 4 concrete walls for a youth who threw his own life away because of violent arrogance. Carmelo Anthony must pay the price for erasing Austin Metcalf's future. Any leniency in this courtroom isn't just a failure of the law. It would be a secondary knife wound to the bleeding hearts of the Metcalf family. Justice has to be swift, it has to be sharp, and it has to be uncompromising. Austin's light was extinguished forever under a tent in the rain. Society owes him the truth, unwarped by politics and a verdict of absolute justice. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments. Are you as outraged by the media spin on this as I am? Do you think the jury will get it right? Sound off below. Make sure you hit subscribe so we can keep tracking this case, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay vigilant.